wind moaned low through the slats of the shutters, and the thatch above shivered under its breath. Inside, the fire had long since died, leaving the hearth a cradle of ash and faint ember. A girl stirred on the rush-strewn floor, half covered by a woolen cloak that smelled of lanolin and mildew. Her brother's leg twitched in sleep beside her and beyond him. Their mother's soft snore mingled with the creaking timbers above. The night outside was black and watchful. To sleep in a peasant's cottage was to surrender to what the dark might bring. The door, barred by only a stick of yew, groaned faintly each time the wind tested its strength. The shutters rattled as if an unseen hand dragged fingernails across them. Beneath the floor, rats skittered near the root cellar, and within the straw, the fleas had already begun their feast. Unseen yet constant feeding, not just on skin, but on the dignity of those too tired to scratch. There were no pillows here, only folded tunics, old and sweat-stained. No sheets, only cloaks shared like bread at the end of hunger. The girl had known little else. She did not long for silks or feather beds. She longed only for a night where the silence didn't feel like a question, and the wind didn't sound like a warning. Worse than hunger, worse than the fleas, worse even than the cold that stiffened fingers and made breath curl like fog inside the room was the fire. Or rather, the fire's memory. One ember, one forgotten spark, and the thatch above them would turn from roof to torch. There were stories, always stories, of neighbors burned in their sleep, of mothers who woke too late, of children whose names were buried in ash because there had been nothing left to carry, even in the city, where stone walls pressed close and laws fell like sermons. Flames did not listen. Candles were forbidden after dusk, and yet they burned. People still read by. Their flicker still prayed with wax between their fingers, and many died with that wax melted into their palms, never knowing which breath had been their last, in manors, in monasteries, in tenements stacked like rotting fruit. The dark was never empty. Servants whispered of guests who came after the final prayer scene, uninvited, drawn by warmth, by breath, by the soft yield of sleeping limbs. No lock could keep them out, because they did not knock. And so the act of sleep became holy not for its rest, but for the trust it required. To close your eyes, to loosen your limbs, to slip into that unguarded state was to lay yourself bare. No night entered battle as naked as a sleeping child. The girl shifted, pulling the wool tighter across her chest. It scratched, it always scratched, but it was hers. And it still carried the scent of sheep and sun-faint reminders that somewhere beyond this hut, past the fields and hedgerows, life had once walked softly. She pressed her back to her mother's spine, familiar, warm, a shape she had leaned against since she was old enough to stagger toward it. Her mother didn't stir, only breathed, slow and steady, as though daring the night to try her. The crow called out once from beyond the shutters. One cry, no answer. Then silence swallowed it whole. Not absence, but presence thick, watchful, aware. The kind of silence that listened. The girl blinked into the dark. Somewhere, a loose tile lifted and fell back with a hollow thud. Somewhere, water dripped from a broken gutter and landed with the rhythm of footsteps on wet stone. She knew the sounds were nothing, knew it the way the elders did when they muttered about saints but still left bread at the crossroads. Some nights, when the wind howled louder and the walls swayed, she imagined the dark not as a place, but as a thing, a mouth with no teeth, a cloak that waited to wrap itself around those who wandered too far from the fire. And still sleep pulled, soft and slow, like a river coaxing a boat to drift. Her eyes grew heavy, her breath synced with her mother's, and for a moment, just one, she let go. But sleep never came all at once. It arrived in fragments, in blinking slowness, in the confusion of time and touch. She felt the fire's ghosts in the air warmth that wasn't there. She heard her father's laugh, though he'd been dead 3 winters now. She smelled burnt barley, saw light flicker beneath her eyelids, all false, all fragments, somewhere. Outside, in the night that curled around the cottage, a twig snapped, loud, sharp, final. The girl's eyes opened wide. Her brother didn't stir, her mother didn't move. Only the embers answered one hiss, like breath through teeth, and then they fell quiet again. She didn't speak. There was no point. Words made things real. Words gave shape to shadows. Instead, she waited for the noise to come again. It didn't, but neither did sleep. Time passed, or didn't. That was the cruel trick of night, it stole time without ever moving. The girl blinked slowly, watching the blackness until her thoughts turned soft again, until fear became something round and familiar. Eventually, her body betrayed her. Warmth crept into her limbs. Her breathing slowed, and just before the final drift, she whispered the same words she said every night, words she'd learned from no one. Words stitched together from the scraps of lullabies and prayers. Let me wake. Let me stay. And then she was gone to it. To the dream place, where the fleas could not bite, and the fire could not burn, and the door always stayed shut. But the door did not stay shut. The stick of you fell loose from its wedge some time before. Dawn quietly, like it had chosen to. The crow cried out again, and the darkness waited. The sun did not rise all at once. It crept, slow and sullen, over the frost-laced fields, casting a dim gold over the hollowed roofs and soot-kissed chimneys of the village. Light reached the windows like a hesitant messenger, softening the black edges of night, but never banishing them fully. Inside the cottage, the air had shifted. It smelled of burnt wool and damp earth. The fire lay cold, a cradle of grey bones where once it had roared. The girl stirred first, as she always did, pulled from sleep by some thread she never saw and never questioned. Her limbs were stiff, her breath clouded in the cold, but something felt wrong. Off. Her brother still slept, curled beneath the same woolen cloak, but the door was open, not wide, just cracked, enough to let in the wind and something colder. The stick of you, once wedged tightly into place, lay on the floor beside a boot smeared with dry mud. She blinked at it, heart rising slow in her throat. Her mother still lay beside her, unmoved, breathing, but barely. The girl rose, her bare feet brushing against the rushes, the cold biting at her skin like small, silent teeth. She padded softly to the door, peered into the dawn. Mist clung low to the ground, coiling like old smoke. The village was still. No footsteps, no sounds of carts or hooves. Just that same thick silence, the kind that had weight, the kind that made her feel watched. She shut the door without a word, pressed the U back into place. And only then did she notice the footprints, not outside, inside, leading in. Then fading, she did not speak of it. Not that morning, not ever. Some things belonged to the dark, and to speak of them was to invite them back. Instead, she began the fire again, her fingers trembling as she struck flint against steel. Sparks danced, a few catching, until flame bloomed like a fragile flower. Her brother stirred, muttered something in his sleep. Her mother did not wake. They had survived the night, but survival in this place was never a clean thing. It left you marked in the eyes, in the way your hands shook, in the way you flinched when the wind touched the door. That day, the village was quieter than usual. The baker's wife did not call out her wares. The priest's bell rang late. And old Merwin, the tanner who never missed a morning to complain about the smell of his trade, was not seen at all. Whispers began before noon, that his door had been found ajar, that his hearth had gone cold in the middle of the night, that his dog had been pacing in circles, howling to a sky that showed no moon. No one said the word, not aloud, but they all felt it, the thinness of the veil, the breath of the unseen brushing too close. By evening, candles were lit early. Doors were barred with more than new, now with iron, salt, carved symbols from before the church ever came. The old ones remembered, and the young had begun to listen. The girl's mother stirred only once that day, coughing dry into her blanket, her lips cracked from thirst. She did not eat, only looked at the girl as if she'd seen her die in a dream and wasn't sure she was really there. That night they didn't speak. There were no stories, no songs, just the crackle of the new fire, the hiss of water over stone, the small sounds of a world trying to convince itself it was still alive. And yet, even in fear, life persisted. The girl helped her brother wash his hands with snow melt. She fetched firewood, careful not to stray too far. She stirred the pot with dried beans and wild onion. These small acts were their defense, their defiance. But when night came again, it came harder. The wind rose sooner. The trees moaned like something ancient had been stirred, and across the village doors trembled in their frames, not from storm, from something slower, more deliberate. Sleep would not come easily. The girl lay beneath the cloak, her back pressed once again to her mother's spine, but the warmth was faint. Her brother, tucked close, whimpered now and then, a noise from the throat of someone who knew he would not be held, and outside, in the space between firelight and frost, something moved, not seen, but felt. It did not knock. It never did. Instead, it lingered like sorrow at the edge of joy, like the breath of a name you almost remember. The priest once said, the darkness tests the faithful, that suffering sharpens the soul. But those words meant little now. Not here. Not in the bone-deep cold, where scripture couldn't warm your skin, and prayers couldn't keep the fire alive. The girl watched the door. The stick of yew was in place. The fire was strong. But still, she did not close her eyes. She listened, and the silence listened back. From the far end of the village came a sound, a sharp crackwood, maybe, or bone, then footsteps, heavy, slow, and then ... gone. She knew that by morning someone would not answer their door, that a hearth would be cold, a bed still made, and no one would ask why. Not truly, they would gather, mourn, bless the ground, and then forget, because remembering was an invitation. And still, in that bleak hush before dawn, something else shifted. Not outside. Inside, her mother stirred, turned, her eyes opened, pale and strange in the firelight, and the girl, watching her, felt something unfamiliar in her chest. Not fear, not yet, but distance, like a door that had opened, and something that had come through. They did not speak of it the next morning, not of the footprints, not of the night sounds, not of the look in her mother's eyes. But silence was never empty. It pressed against the walls, folded into the steam of the morning porridge, settled like dust across the wooden table. The girl moved carefully, as if the floor might splinter beneath her feet. Her brother played with a broken comb, dragging its teeth through the straw. Her mother sat upright, staring through the window though the shutters were still closed. The girl touched her once lightly on the wrist. Her mother did not flinch, but neither did she turn. Outside, frost covered the thatch like the breath of something watching from above. A raven perched on the chimney, peering down into the smoke, its black feathers dull in the grey light. No one had seen Merwin, not now for 2 days. The tanner's dog had stopped howling, and the bell at the church had not rung again. Instead, it was the baker's boy who ran through the lanes, barefoot and breathless, crying of a cellar door found wide open and scratch marks on the frame, of bread turned to ash, of a mirror cracked from the inside. People listened, but no one answered, not with words. They began marking their doors with chalk, the old signs, the broken loop, the bent star, the horned cross that predated Christ, and memory alike. Some hung herbs, some poured milk at their thresholds. The priest said nothing, only watched from his window with hands that trembled when they thought themselves unseen. By midday, smoke no longer curled from every chimney. Fear does not feed the fire, it waits, and the wind carried the weight of something unsaid in the cottage. The girl's mother spoke for the first time. "Do not sleep tonight." It was not a warning, it was a command. Her voice was the same, and yet hollow, not lifeless, just farther away. The girl nodded. She did not ask why. She had already seen the shadow under her mother's nails, already smelled the difference. In her skin the way warmth no longer clung to her. That night, they did not light the fire, they let the dark come. The brother whimpered, pulled at his sister's arm, whispered about monsters. She hushed him, held him, pressed his face into her shoulder and whispered stories without names, fragments of tales from her grandmother's tongue. Before even she remembered where they came from, her mother sat near the door, unmoving, watching, and in that deep, velvet dark, something did knock, not loud, 3 slow taps, as though knuckles dragged across the grain of the wood. 1, 2, 3, then silence. The brother had gone stiff, his breath hitched, stuck in his throat. The girl's hands found the stick of yew, pressed it harder into the doorframe. A second knock, this time softer, like breath against skin. And then the third, a whisper more than sound, a suggestion of presence, a promise of entry. Her mother rose. Her footsteps did not creak the floor. She reached the door and placed her hand flat upon it, not to push, not to hold, but to welcome. The girl saw it in her posture, in the stillness of one who listens to voices from the other side. Then her mother spoke again, but not in words the girl understood. A low sound, rhythmic, almost a hum, like the chants of the old women, sang when a child was being born, or when one died. The girl did not move. The brother sobbed once into her chest, and then the door shuddered. Just once, and then it stopped. Silence returned, but it was thinner now, like cloth stretched tight. Her mother turned back. Her eyes glinted, even without fire. Not human, not inhuman, just changed. "Sleep now," she said, and the girl felt something cold pour through her stomach. She did not sleep, not that night, not the one after she watched her mother from beneath the blanket, watched the way her limbs stiffened when she moved, watched the way her breath no longer fogged the air, and when her mother began rising before the sun, before the rooster's cry, Before even the frost dared settle, the girl followed Dot once, just once. She watched as her mother walked barefoot into the woods, robe trailing behind her like a shroud. She did not take a lantern, she did not take a blade, she did not sing. She walked as though summoned, and when she returned an hour later, her feet were clean, her eyes were darker, and beneath her nails was soiled the color of blood. The girl did not ask, she helped her mother wash her hands. Heated water over a small flame, lit only for that purpose, then quickly doused. By now, the villagers had begun to disappear. One by one, no struggle, no scream, just gone. Their homes left untouched, their tools still warm, bread half sliced, soup still steaming, and in their place, silence, always silence. Some said plague, others said judgment, but the girl had seen the truth. It walked in shadow. It fed on breath. It wore the skin of those who no longer prayed, and her mother was no longer praying. The priest tried once, during Mass, to name it, to call it what it was. The church burned that night. No one rebuilt it. Instead, they turned to the fields, to the wind, to the soil, to old gods and older bargains. But the girl did not turn. She remained, watching, listening, waiting, because something had passed through that door. Something had touched her family and left its mark, and she knew as the next dusk approached, as the wind howled low and the frost returned to the window's edge, that it had not finished, that it would return, and this time it would knock for her. Dusk came like a closing eye. The sky, once bruised purple, sank into the grey of ash and bone. Across the village, shutters were fastened tight with iron and salted rope, and chimney smoke twisted weakly into the chill. No one spoke after sundown now. No one swept their steps. No one whistled. No one dared leave food uncovered. The girl stood at the threshold of the cottage, hand on the yew-stick that had once been enough. She no longer believed it would hold, not against what came knocking, not against what lived in her mother's eyes now. Her brother slept already, too tired or too young to notice the difference in the air. He clutched the woolen cloak tight to his chest, unaware that its warmth no longer belonged to the living. The fire was low, carefully tended, just enough to trick the night into thinking it was welcome. Her mother sat near the door again, not watching it, listening, not to the wind, but to something beneath it. The girl had not told anyone what she'd seen. Her mother walking into the woods without leaving prints, the black soil under her nails, the chant at the door, because there was no one left to tell. The tanner's house was empty. The cooper's children were missing. Even the priest's cottage was silent, his bell rusted stiff on its hook. Only the raven remained, perched now atop the dying tree by the well, staring at her window as if it remembered her name. Tonight she would not sleep, not because of fear, but because of choice. She had waited 3 nights since the first knock, since her mother spoke in a tongue that didn't belong to the village, since her brother began to cry out in dreams without waking. She had waited, hoping the thing would pass over them, that it would take someone else, that it would tire, but the knock always returned, and each night her mother rose a little sooner. Each time the door opened a little wider, it would be tonight. She felt it in her spine, in the way the shutters pulsed against the wind, in the way the fire kept trying to die. The girl placed a pot of water near the hearth, not to cook, but to reflect, because water, the old ones said, remembers truth, even when people do not. Her mother turned to her then, eyes wide, lips cracked. "It's not a curse," she whispered. It's a calling." The girl didn't answer. Her mother's face was thinner now, hollowed at the cheeks, her skin drawn tight like leather over bone. She was changing, but slowly, like wood rotting from within, quiet, unseen, until it collapses with no warning. "You'll see," her mother said, voice distant, "once you open it." "No," the girl whispered. It was the first word she had spoken all day. But her mother only smiled, a slow, sad smile, like someone who has lost a bet she always knew she'd lose. "You'll open it, or it will come through anyway." The girl stood, moved slowly to the door. She touched the U-stick, still in place. The latch, still firm, the hinges, still whole, but they would not hold forever, and she did not want to wait to be taken. She had made her choice. The boots by the door still fit, her father's worn, cracked, the leather softened by years of toil. She pulled them on, lacing them with trembling fingers. She took the cloak from her brother's side, pressing it gently around his shoulders as he stirred in sleep. Then she lit a torch. The flame caught fast, greedy, bright. She looked once at her mother, sitting in silence, head tilted toward the door, eyes closed now, or perhaps simply empty. And then the girl unbarred the door. The wind burst in, tearing through the room like a shout. The fire flinched. The torch flickered, and beyond it only darkness. No figure, no shape, no voice. But she knew it was there. She stepped outside. Behind her, the door creaked closed, not with force, but with intent. She did not turn. She would not look back. The frost beneath her feet cracked like thin glass. Her breath coiled in the air like smoke from a dying prayer. She walked past the well, past the smithy, where tools still hung above an anvil that had not sung in days. Past the priest's gate, half open, the steps dusted with leaves and ash. The raven followed, silent dot, and then, at the edge of the wood, she stopped. Here the ground was wrong, too soft, too warm. The trees leaned inward, their branches like fingers whispering secrets overhead. Fog clung low, breathing against her shins. She raised the torch. It hissed in the damp dot, and there, half hidden beneath twisted roots, she saw the shape. A door, wooden bound in iron, set into the earth like a wound, not built by men. The girl knelt. Something pulsed beneath the soil. She heard the voice, not spoken, not sung, felt like heat, like memory. It spoke no name, but it knew hers. Her fingers brushed the iron latch. Cold, old. She did not open it. Instead, she placed the torch beside it, letting the flame illuminate the twisted carvings in the wood. Marks older than scripture, older than speech. She sat there, waiting for the knock dot, not on wood this time, but in her blood, her bones, and when it came it was not violent, not sudden, just a feeling, a soft press against her thoughts, a shadow behind the eyes. And for the first time, she understood what her mother meant. It was not a curse, it was a hunger, and hunger remembers those who resist. But still, she did not open the door. She wrapped her arms round her knees, pressed her back against the tree, and stared at the iron-bound hatch in the earth. If it wanted her, it would have to take her fully. There is a kind of light that does not belong to dawn. It came in the stillness between hours, when the sky was neither black nor blue, but bruised with the color of smoke. The trees did not move, though no wind held them. The birds did not sing, though their throats had not been slit, and the fog had grown thicker, so thick it seemed to breathe. The girl sat at the edge of the wood, back pressed against a twisted yew, her limbs wrapped in her father's old cloak. The torch burned low. Beside her, The flame had shrunk to a whisper now, a glowing wick barely alive, casting strange shadows on the door and the earth. It hadn't moved, not yet, but neither had she. Sleep tugged at her eyes like a thief. Her bones ached. Her stomach gnawed on itself. But still, she did not leave. She had waited through the long, soundless dark, waited for the thing to come through the door, waited for it to speak, to reach, to change her as it had changed the others. But it hadn't, and that, somehow, felt worse. Because now she was not sure if it meant to take her, or if it already had. She rose slowly, joints stiff and cold, and approached the door again. Her boots sank slightly in the damp soil. Beneath her feet, the ground pulsed faintly once every few seconds, like the heartbeat of something vast and dreaming. She knelt beside the iron latch, her breath coiled against the wood. There were no hinges, no lock, just the carvings, twisting lines, broken circles, symbols she did not recognize but felt inside her ribs. Her fingertips brushed the surface, and the wood was warm, alive, not in a way she could explain, but in the way that certain stones hum when touched, in the way blood sometimes sings before it spills. She pulled her hand back. Behind her, the raven cawed once from its perch in the yew, a rough, broken sound, not warning, not alarm, more like sorrow. She turned and froze. Her mother was standing just beyond the fog, barefoot, pale. Her shift clung to her like wet paper, and her hair hung down her shoulders like black reeds. Her eyes no longer her own glowed faintly in. The half-light, not like fire, but like cold heat without flame. "You came here," her mother said. But it wasn't a question. The girl nodded. "I told you not to open it." "I haven't." Her mother stepped forward. The earth did not mark her weight. "You will." The girl's voice trembled, but she did not look away. "Why? Because it calls you?" "No." Her mother tilted her head, slow and bird-like. "You think not choosing is resistance, but choosing not to choose is still a path. It already knows your name." The girl backed away. One step, and the fog stirred suddenly for a moment, revealing something else just beyond the trees. Figures, still as stones. Watching, they were not villagers, too tall, too thin. Their limbs bent wrong, their faces wrong, blurry at the edges, like memories from a fever. The girl swallowed, her breath caught. "They wait," her mother said. "For what you will decide. I don't want it, but it wants you." And then her mother smiled. Her mouth opened wide. To widen from her lips came not words, but a sound like roots breaking through earth. The girl turned and ran, back through the trees, back across the frost-hardened field, past the well, the priest's gate, the silent houses with shuttered eyes. The raven followed overhead, silent now. The cottage door stood ajar. Inside, her brother still slept, or pretended to. The fire had burned itself out. She slammed the door shut, rammed the yew into place, and fell to her knees, chest heaving, throat raw. Behind her, silence, but not peace. She sat there for a long time, eyes on the wood grain of the door, the cracks, the way the wind whispered through the edges. Her hands were shaking, but her heart was not any more, because she had seen it, not just the door in the woods, but what stood behind it. Not a monster, not a demon, but a mirror. It did not take it. Offered the end of hunger, of cold, of fear, and in return, only obedience. That was the secret. That's why the others had vanished with no struggle. They hadn't been stolen. They had agreed. It was not possession. It was surrender. And now it wanted her answer. She stood slowly, walked to the hearth, and stirred the coals. A few still breathed faintly. She fed them kindling, then wood, and watched the fire return, slow and stubborn. Her brother stirred and sat up. His eyes were wide. He had been awake for some time. Was it here? He asked. She nodded. Did it take her? Another nod. He looked at the fire, then at her. What do we do? She didn't speak. Instead, she walked to the door and laid her hand against it. The wood was cool. Normal. She felt nothing. The raven cawed again, this time from the rooftop, and the fire behind her crackled louder. She turned to her brother. We don't open it. He looked confused. But it'll come again. Yes, she said. It will. Then what? We bar the door every night. We tend the fire. We say the names of the ones we remember. We speak nothing to the dark. And we never, ever ask what's beneath the earth. He nodded, small, scared, but willing. And the fire glowed brighter outside. The fog began to lift. The figures were gone. The heartbeat beneath the soil had stilled. But the girl knew better than to call it over it. Had not ended, only begun. The trembling began beneath the hearth, not loud, not sudden, but deep like something shifting far below, older than the stone it stirred, older than fire, older even than fear. The girl felt it first in her teeth, a faint, grinding pressure. Then, in her bones, the kind of tremor that doesn't shake the world but unsteadies the soul. She kept her hands steady as she stirred the pot. Broth, thin as breath, bubbled faintly. Wild onion, dried root, the last of the barley. Her brother sat nearby, chewing quietly, eyes darting often to the door. It had been 3 nights since she'd returned from the woods. 3 nights since her mother became something else. 3 nights of watching the fog press against the shutters, of listening to the wind carry whispers in a voice not shaped by lungs. 3 nights of the fire never being allowed to die. They had not spoken of the door. They had not spoken of her. But the earth remembered, and now it had begun to move. She did not show her fear, not to her brother, not to herself. Instead, she reached for the iron poker, buried its tip in the glowing coals, and held it there until the metal sang red dot from the rooftop. The raven cried, once sharp and fast. Then silence, not stillness, just silence, heavy, watchful. She fed the fire again when darkness fell. The light from their cottage was one of only 3 left in the village. The blacksmith's forge, now cold, hadn't burned in days. The cooper's family was gone. The baker's windows were shuttered and nailed. Only the girl, the candlemaker's widow, and the old woman with blind eyes and a throat full of spells, still dared to cast fire into the dark. But even their lights flickered low. Tonight, because the tremble had spread across the fields, tools fell from hooks, wells soured, chickens refused to roost. Dogs howled at earth, not sky, and in the chapel ruins, beneath the ashes, something began to hum. She felt it in her sleep. Sleep could still be called that, a half-state, a kind of waiting behind the eyes. Her body would go still, but her mind, it paced, it listened, and on the 4th night it heard something rise, not with sound, with pressure. The floor of the cottage grew warm, damp. By morning, the rushes were wilted. Mold crept up the beams. The scent of damp stone filled the air. And then came the first cracked it split the hearthstone straight through. The sound woke her brother. He screamed. She did not. She stood barefoot and ran her hand across the jagged split. From beneath it, a faint breath of heat escaped. Not fire-earth heat. Wet and old. She said nothing. Later, while her brother slept beneath the cloak, she walked back to the woods, not to the door in the earth, to the old woman's hut. It sat at the village's edge, leaned against a hawthorn tree that had never bloomed. Smoke curled from the thatch. Bones hung from the eaves chicken lamb. Once a jaw with a gold tooth still inside. The door opened before she knocked. The woman's eyes were milk pale, filmed with time, but they saw more than anyone else's. You heard it, the woman said. Dot. The girl nodded. Double quotes, and now it moves. Yes. The woman turned away, stepped inside. Leave your shoes. The old ground doesn't like iron. She obeyed. The floor was dirt, smooth, swept clean with a broom made of bramble. Herbs hung from the beams, mugwort, rue, dried lavender turned grey. A pot boiled with something that smelled of rust and rain. The girl stood by the door. You opened it. No, but you touched it. A pause. Yes. The old woman sighed. Then it knows your skin. She didn't reply. The woman dipped a ladle into the pot, poured steaming liquid into a bowl made of horn. Drink. What is it? Something. Bitter and honest. She drank. It burned her tongue, her throat, her stomach. She coughed, nearly vomited. But when the taste cleared, so did something else. She could hear. More. The trees outside weren't silent. They whispered in old voices. The fire didn't just crack, it spoke, not in words, in warnings, and beneath it all, the hum, not from one place, from many, from beneath every hearthstone, beneath every grave, beneath every prayer. What is it? She asked, voice hoarse. Something buried, long ago, something fed by choice, by fear, by obedience. Is it a god? It doesn't need to be. Power doesn't ask for names. Can it be stopped? No, the woman said, but it can be remembered, and memory is the oldest boundary. The girl looked down at her hands. They were clean, but she still felt the warmth from the earth. When she returned to the cottage, the crack in the hearth had widened. Her brother had drawn chalk symbols on the walls, circles, eyes, doors. He said he didn't know why. She kissed his forehead, and that night she did not sleep. Instead, she took ash from the hearth, mixed it with salt, and painted her palms. She recited no prayers, but she whispered names. All the names she remembered, even the ones she no longer loved, especially those, because the old woman had said memory was a wall, and tonight the earth was clawing through it just before dawn. The fire blew out, not faded, blew out like a breath, cold and deliberate. The girl stood fast, and from the crack beneath the hearth, a hand emerged, pale, thin, fingernails black. With soil, it did not reach for her. It placed something on the floor, a bone, human, small. Then it vanished. The earth sealed again. The tremor stopped. The raven cried. Her brother stirred, and the girl, now shaking, picked up the bone. A finger, wrapped in twine, dot around it, carved in perfect lines. You opened nothing. But you are the key. The fire would not light, not with kindling, not with oil, not even with breath. The girl scraped flint against steel until her fingers bled. But the sparks died mid-air, swallowed by something colder than stone. The hearth sat silent, the cracked stone like a mouth that would no longer speak. Her brother huddled beneath the cloak, teeth chattering though the morning sun had broken clear. But even daylight felt hollow, now bright, but without warmth. The fog had lifted, yes, but the sky was pale as bone, and the wind had no smell. She stepped outside, carrying the unlit torch. Across the village, chimneys stood still, windows shuttered. No footsteps, no roosters, no wood smoke. Even the raven was gone, only silence, thick and bruised, like the hush after a scream. Something had shifted. Beneath the hearthstone, the crack had closed, no trace of the hand, no warmth, no ash dot, only the finger bone wrapped in twine, hidden now in a clothed pouch she wore beneath her tunic. You opened nothing, but you are the key. The words carved into it pulsed in her thoughts like an echo that could not be silenced. At midday, the girl visited the widow, the last house on the lane. The door was open. Inside, bread lay untouched on the table. A kettle, still warm, but no flame beneath it. A stool tipped over. A candle melted into the shape of a weeping man. But no widow, only her shawl, folded neatly by the hearth. The girl didn't speak. She closed the door gently. And when she turned, the street behind her was unfamiliar. Houses were in the wrong places. The lane curved differently. The well, now dry, was covered in ivy that hadn't been there yesterday. She retraced her steps, reached her own door. Her brother stood outside, staring at her like she was a stranger. "Where were you?" he asked. "I was only gone an hour." "No, you were gone all day." She looked up. The sun was nearly gone. The sky had darkened without warning. No twilight, just a sudden, bruising dusk. Time had shifted, or memory had. She took his hand and led him inside, but the cottage no longer felt like theirs. The walls seemed closer, the ceiling lower. The rushes on the floor had begun to rot, and the fire still would not light. She mixed ash and salt again, painting her palms and her brother's brow. He asked nothing now. He understood, in the quiet way the children do, that questions could open doors best left closed. That night, the dreams came, not hers, his. He screamed in his sleep, hands clawing the air. Breath stuck like something was choking him from inside. She held him, but his eyes stayed shut. His mouth moved, forming a name he didn't know. When he woke, he didn't recognize her. For a moment, just a moment. Then he wept. The village, too, had begun to forget. Names fell away from lips like leaves from a winter tree. The baker wandered the square, asking if anyone had seen his wife, though she had died last year, buried. Beneath the chapel that no longer stood, children played in silence, drawing symbols in dirt they didn't understand. The smith polished tools with hands that no longer remembered their purpose. Even the sky seemed to forget itself, clouds forming and dissolving in unnatural rhythms. The sun rising from the wrong edge of the hills, something had torn loose beneath. The village, not a creature, not a curse, a memory unshade, and in its absence, the world unravelled. She returned to the yew tree at the wood's edge. The iron-bound door still lay there, covered in moss that hadn't grown before. The symbols were changing, new lines etched into old ones, curling like roots, like veins. She knelt, her fingers trembled. "You opened nothing," she whispered, "but you are the key." What had her mother meant? The chants, the offering. She pulled the pouch from beneath her tunic, unwrapped the finger. The twine had tightened, blood wet, though no blood spilled. and the bone was warm again. She placed it gently on the earth. The door pulsed beneath it, and then a voice not from outside, from within her, not words, but sensation, longing, hunger, memory, but not hers, not yet, it said. She recoiled, snatched the pouch, staggered backward, breath ragged. The earth beneath the door shuddered just once, and then the symbols shifted. Again, not just carved, alive, she ran. The forest did not follow, but neither did it stay still. Branches twisted toward her. Roots surfaced where there had been none. Birds watched in silence, their eyes glassy, unmoving. The path to the village bent unnaturally. Her feet bled. Her cloak caught on bramble that hadn't grown yesterday. By the time she reached the cottage, her brother had lit the fire. She froze, watched the flame dance, strong and sure. He smiled weakly. "The stick worked," he said. "The one you carved?" She hadn't carved any stick, but she said nothing. Instead, she knelt, held her hands to the fire, felt its warmth, but the warmth didn't spread to her chest. There, it remained cold, hollow, because something had entered her. She wasn't sure when. The woods, the door, the dream, but something now remembered itself inside her, and the flame that danced before her was watching. She looked into it and for a moment saw not fire, but an eye. Then it blinked and was gone. They woke without names, not in the way the old sometimes forget, not with the soft erosion of age or grief. No, this forgetting was clean. Sudden, surgical dot, like waking into a world where language had withered in the night, and names were weeds no longer allowed to grow. The blacksmith stood at his forge, hammer in hand, staring at the metal as though it had betrayed him. He struck. It once softly, then again, harder. The rhythm was wrong. The sound fell flat, and he looked at the hammer as if it had always belonged to someone else. The baker's daughter, once named Len, wandered barefoot into the square, her apron stained with flour, her eyes empty. She asked no questions. She did not look lost, just unfinished. Even the church bell, which had not rung since the chapel burned, sounded once no hand pulled its rope. The girl heard it from the cottage. Her brother did not stir. He slept now like the dead, no twitch, no sound, no breath she could see. And when she shook him gently, his eyes opened wide and did not recognize her. "Who are you?" he asked. She did not answer. Instead, she touched the mark she had painted on his brow the night before. Ash and salt. It was still there, but it hadn't worked. He flinched from her hand, pressed himself against the wall. "You're not my sister," he whispered, and maybe by now she wasn't. She stepped outside. The village was quiet, but not still. People moved, chopped wood, drew water, stacked hay. But they did so with no names on their lips, no greetings, no songs. As though they were acting out roles they no longer understood. Memory had become mimicry. She passed the old woman's hut on the way to the well. Its door hung loose. Inside, silence. No herbs, no bones, no heat. She had vanished like the rest. No sign, no farewell, but carved into the dirt floor was a circle, perfect, clean. Within it, the shape of an eye, and beneath it, a line of glyphs she could not read. They pulsed faintly. When she approached, not glowing, breathing. She fled. At the well, the raven waited. It stood on the stone edge, staring into the water. She approached slowly. It did not fly. She looked into the well. No. Reflection. Not her face. not the sky only. Darkness, endless and floating up from it. The smell of soil and old. Blood. She turned and ran back to the cottage, back to the hearth, back to the only place where something still remembered warmth. She threw kindling into the pit, twisted the tinder, sparked the flint. Nothing. The fire would not rise, only the bone in the pouch, warmed. She unwrapped it. It pulsed now, softly, like a heart, and the twine had begun to unravel. She lifted it in her hand. It hummed against her skin, and then she heard it, not from the earth, not from outside, from her brother. He had begun to hum a tune she didn't know, a song with no words, but it filled the room like smoke. She turned to him, his eyes glowed faintly, and when she stepped toward him, he blinked as if waking from a dream. "Sister," he said, not a question, a recognition. And then, softly, he wept. She held him, rocked him gently. The fire, forgotten, sparked to life behind her. When she turned, the flame danced wild, hungry, alive, but not warm. The heat was wrong, too sharp, too focused, and in its center shadows moved, not flames, forms reaching. She stepped back, the bone fell from her hand into the fire. It did not burn, it sank, and the flame changed, turned black, not smoke, not ash, a black flame, hissing, and from it came a voice. She remembers, she resists, she belongs. She clutched her brother's hand. The fire grew, the walls began to tremble, not from collapse, from memory. Images flickered across the stone, her mother standing at the door. Eyes black. The woods twisting, whispering. The chapel burning, the villagers forgetting, and beneath it all, the door in the earth, pulsing like a wound. Then it stopped. The flame returned to orange. The hearth fell silent. The images vanished. Her brother looked at her. "I remember now." "What?" "The name," he whispered. "What name?" He looked to the fire, then back at her. "Yours." She froze. "I don't." But the word was already slipping. What was her name? She closed her eyes, tried to grasp it, but all she found was silence. She opened them. The cottage was empty. No brother, no fire, only the pouch on the ground. She lifted it, empty then. Behind her the door creaked open, and her brother stood there. But not alone, a figure stood behind him, not tall, not monstrous, just familiar, a face half hidden in shadow, features not quite right, a posture she had seen before. It extended its hand, not in threat, in offering, and in its palm a flame. Black, hissing, waiting. The flame in the figure's palm did not flicker. It held still, as if the air around it bowed in silence. Black and sharp-edged, it cast no shadow, and yet it seemed to cut through everything: the doorway, the dust, her breath. The girl stood frozen. Her brother turned to look at her, but it wasn't quite him. His face held no fear, only stillness. His eyes, once mossy and bright, now held the still grey colour of riverstone. And when he opened his mouth, he spoke not with a child's voice, but with memory, old memory, worn smooth by centuries. "It has waited," he said. The figure behind him stepped forward. It bore no face, just the idea of one. Eyes implied by shadow, a mouth that did not move. It didn't walk, it arrived, like a thought that no longer needed permission to be known. "You are the last name," it said, though no sound left its lips. And she understood, the bone in the fire, the earth's trembling, The vanishing of memory, it had not been punishment. It had been a cleansing, a making ready, not for death, for inheritance. You are the key, the thing whispered, not in her ears, but in her blood. The lock is forgetting, the door is history. We are what is left behind when the world remembers nothing. The girl shook her head. She backed away, one step, then two. Her heels struck the edge of the hearth. I didn't open it, but you did, the voice said. Not with hands, with witness. You saw what was meant to remain buried. You loved what was meant to be replaced. The walls of the cottage pulsed once, then softened. They were no longer wood, no longer stone. They bent like parchment soaked through. Around her, the world folded. She saw the chapel, again not burning, but whole. She saw her mother before the silence entered her. She saw the villagers laughing, dancing, naming their children, and then those names turned to crows, scattering into Ashdod. Her brother held out his hand. Come, he said. You don't have to carry it anymore. What? She whispered. The burden of remembering. Let it go, let us go. And now her name was unraveling in her throat. She tried to speak it, could not. Tried again, nothing, only silence. She turned, ran out the door, into the Fogels's, starless dark. The village had melted. The smithy was gone. The well a dry throat in the ground. The woods had come closer, trees leaning as though listening. Houses stood like empty shells, unburdened by memory, and still the door in the earth waited. She returned to it as if pulled. The yew tree stood silent. The iron-bound hatch lay undisturbed. But now it was open, no sound, no creak, just open. A stair descended worn stone, slick with old moss, vanishing into a black so pure it seemed to hum. She looked back, nothing behind her, not her brother, not the raven, not even the wind, only the voice. Endings are only choices made permanent. She placed one foot on the stair. The cold was immediate, sharp, not physical, but ancestral, like stepping into someone else's grave. She descended. Each step a memory peeled back. The taste of barley broth, the warmth of her brother's cheek, the scream of her mother in the woods, the way her father's boots had once felt far too big. With each step, these slipped away slowly at first, then faster, like pages torn from a book already on fire. At the bottom, a chamber, circular, root-bound, older than language. In the center, a mirror, but not of glass, of water, still, black, bottomless. She looked in, and saw not herself, but everyone, every forgotten name, every vanished face. All the villagers who had disappeared into silence. Their eyes met hers, not in plea, not in anger, in recognition. She had carried them, and now she could let them go, but she would go with them. The voice returned. You may choose. Let the world forget and we will rest, or carry us longer and be undone. And now, at last, she spoke, but not aloud, inward, into the mirror. I will. Remember, the chamber cracked, not broke, cracked, like ice under weight, like an egg too full of life. Roots split. The stair crumbled. She stood firm, and the black water surged up, then folded in, and when it cleared, she stood in the village. Once more, firelight danced from every chimney. Children laughed. Bread baked. Names were sung aloud, but no one saw her. She passed through them like wind. Her brother walked among them happy, whole, alive, but she did not reach for him. She was no longer part of their world. because to choose memory is to choose exile. The world only holds what it forgets. She stood at the edge of the well. The raven returned, perched on her shoulder. She whispered her name once. Into the wind it did not echo, but it did remain, not in the ears of others, but in the bones of the earth, in the stories whispered to sleeping children in the spaces between forgetting. She turned, cloaked in silence, and walked back toward the woods, where doors still sleep beneath roots, where firelight still hides behind eyes, and where memory like her never truly dies.